Hey guys, welcome to ESO Vault. Recently I did a build video for a heavy attack sorcerer, and I'm going to add in another heavy attack build today. This 1-bar Warden build will work great for just about any content you want to do. Like the pet sork I did, this is easier to play than 2-bar builds. But unless you're used to a heavy attack build, they can be a little confusing because they work very differently than 2-bar builds. Hopefully this video will be easy to understand and make how these builds work as clear as possible. I think this build is actually easier to play than the sorcerer because there's only one pet to keep track of here, and there's an option to have it respawn automatically if it dies. Damage-wise, this is right there with everything else I've given you. 1-bar, 2-bars, they're all pretty close together when I play them. I'm not a great light attack weaving guy, but I can get by, so I don't really care which one I play. But if you're interested in running a 1-bar Warden, stick around. Alright, let's have a look at the character sheet. My Warden is an Orc, which is a decent stamina DPS race. I'll put the top races on the screen for anybody interested. I have to mention that I finally got over 2,000 champion points. Not that I cared, but for anybody wanting to farm champion points, if you want to do the Infinite Archive, you can get a bunch. Word of warning, there's no difficulty switch in the Archive. It's all the same no matter what level you are, whether you're solo or duo. It doesn't take any of that into account in any way, so be prepared for that. My riding speed here is low because this character was rolled recently, believe it or not. I have a confession to make, and that's that I don't really ride anywhere that much. When I'm going overland, I'm always farming or questing on the way, so I don't generally ride. But I'll get that leveled eventually. I'm using Bewitched Sugar Skulls as my food buff, and that's maybe an expensive way to go unless you're making it yourself. I would use something else, except I actually like the buff to health regeneration on this. And to give that context, I don't recommend speccing into health regen usually because it's outclassed by other healing methods. But because of a quirk that's particular to the Warden, it actually works out to be significant here. So I use the Sugar Skulls to lean into that, and you'll see why when we get to skills. I'm using my usual Mundus Stone, which is the Thief. The Thief increases my critical strike chance. Up at the top of the character sheet, you can see I've got 64 points in stamina. My health is higher than I run a lot of the time because the Sugar Skulls raise that up to 24,000. Nice thing about heavy attack builds is you can run a higher health pool. Health recovery on this is a staggering 1700 unbuffed. So the second I use a tri-stat potion in combat, that goes over 2,000. So I'm getting 1,000 health points every second. That's significant. Weapon damage and critical chance are pretty typical. Those are unbuffed values. A lot of the time you'll be running potions of weapon power to raise those up, but this character doesn't because the major brutality and major savagery buffs are supplied by the Oaken Soul Ring here. Instead, I just run the tri-stat potions I get for having ESO+. Physical resistance is high for a damage dealer. That's the Oaken Soul Ring again, buffing that. We'll look at that in the gear section. Okay, let's go ahead and look at skills, which are the most important part. I'm looking at the skills in the order of the rotation, and I want to mention that in a heavy attack build, there is no light attack weaving. Instead, while you're holding down that heavy attack button, you queue up the skills. I'll lead off with 4 skills before I use my first heavy attack though. First I use Lotus Blossom, which is a Warden class skill that heals me for 4,000 points with every heavy attack. Note that there's no burst heal here. If you're uncomfortable with this, by all means, run a burst heal. But I think you'll find that this plus the high rate of health recovery are going to be enough. Now I'll send a swarm of flies at the enemy with Growing Swarm. This causes an enemy to take bleed damage over time and nearby enemies to take a lesser amount of damage. The original target is also affected with minor vulnerability. Next I'll cast Deep Fissure, which is another Warden class skill. This causes shock to attack targets in an area after 3 seconds and again after 6 more. This is what I'm most focused on keeping good uptime on, especially because this is my source of major breach, lowering the resistance of targets by 5,000 points. Finally, I'll use the Destruction Staff skill, Blockade of Storms. Now this is a point where I'm going to depart from most heavy attack builds because they use the short duration morph, which is Unstable Wall of Elements. They use that morph because it does more damage, but frankly that damage is very small compared to the heavy attack damage here. And what happens is you wind up increasing the difficulty of running the build significantly. So I highly recommend that you use Blockade, which is the longer duration morph. Alright, so I used my first 4 skills, and now the fight is on. Now I start holding down my heavy attack button and I don't let up on that sucker. What I'll do is queue up attacks that I need to refresh. I queue up a skill by pressing it while I'm holding down the heavy attack button. The second that heavy attack is finished, the skill will fire and the next heavy attack will begin. I'm watching for the blue glow of the shock from the Deep Fissure skill. When I've seen that twice, I'll queue up Deep Fissure again. When I don't see any more lightning on the ground, I'll queue up Blockade of Storms. Deep Fissure and Blockade of Storms for my focus, and I'll work in Growing Swarm where I can. Deep Fissure always takes priority, and don't try to queue up more than one skill at a time. Remember, I'm holding that heavy attack button down the whole time. There are two skills here I haven't talked about. I've got Bird of Prey slotted for a 4% passive increase to critical damage. As a matter of fact, I get a 16% increase because I have 4 abilities from the Animal Companion skill line slotted. I can also use Bird of Prey to get a 6-second speed boost whenever I want. When I hit that button, out come the wings and I get the Major Expedition buff. Last on the bar is the ultimate, Wild Guardian, the Bear. The Bear does good bleed damage and you can use its special attack for extra damage by spending 75 ultimate. You'll queue that up the same way you queue up the other skills. You're still holding down that heavy attack button, right? Don't let up on that. Now you can make a choice here. This Warden gets that high health recovery I talked about based on how much ultimate he has. So if you need that extra recovery in a fight with a lot of incoming damage, don't use the Bear's special attack. Let the ultimate pile up. Now the Bear is a lot tougher than Sorcerer Pets, but occasionally he will die, and you'll have to summon him again. If you don't want to do that, run the other morph. The Eternal Guardian morph will automatically summon the Bear again if it's killed. Your call on that. Okay, since this is a 1-bar build, that's it for skills. Let's put it all together with a quick fight. I have 3 world bosses that I use for these fights, but it seems like No Meg Ryan's number has been coming up a lot. Poor bastard. Speak of the devil. I think I actually cast Wall of Storms before Deep Fissure in this example, which is contrary to what I told you, but that doesn't actually matter this first time, and after that you're going to refresh whichever one needs it. I did the Bear's special attack right off the bat. Using a staff makes staying out of this guy's AoE easy. I didn't revisit Growing Swarm or the Bear's special attack in this fight. I just did them right at the beginning, and that's okay. When you see where all the damage is coming from, you'll get it. Alright, you frozen bastard. 43,000 points of damage per second. I think most of the content in the game is within reach with that. If you add those two heavy attack numbers together, that's 70% of the total damage. Blockade of Storms is a drop in the bucket compared to that. Even if you took the unstable wall morph and it did twice as much damage, that doesn't make a hill of beans worth of difference unless you're trying to get on the leaderboards. That's why I say to take the Blockade morph, because it's much easier to use. Growing Swarm doesn't look like it's doing much, but remember, it's applying minor vulnerability to your target for 5% more damage. You don't get that from the Oaken Soul Ring. And yeah, I already gave it away that this build has the Oaken Soul Ring. The Oaken Soul Ring only applies buffs to the wearer, not debuffs to the enemy. Up in the pink numbers, you can see Off Balance was up 33% of the time, which coincidentally is the theoretical max on because it has a cooldown. During that time, my heavy attacks did 70% more damage, and they're 70% of my total damage. You do the math on that, I'm getting confused. Let's just leave it at that, adding a whole lot to my overall damage. Off balance is obviously important. How did it happen? It happened because that shock glyph on my staff made my target concussed. And if you read the description of Wall of Storms, casting that skill with a lightning staff automatically sets targets off balance. Let's backtrack a second. How did the target get concussed? That's shock damage. A lightning staff can do it by itself, but since the chance is low, the uptime is crappy. A shock enchantment has a way higher chance. And that's why it's a lightning staff with a shock glyph for heavy attack builds. Well, that's not the only reason, because there are other ways of getting off balance. I'll talk about the other reason in the gear section. Gear is going to look familiar to anyone that watched the heavy attack pet sort video. I'm using a lightning staff with a sergeant, which is from a 5-piece set that comes from Wayrest Sewers. This is an easy dungeon, so queue up and farm this if you don't already have it. The final reason a lightning staff is best for heavy attack builds is because it procs its damage multiple times during one heavy attack channel, and the 5th bonus of this set gets applied to each tick. That doesn't happen with other weapons. Sergeant's Mail is the strongest of the heavy attack sets, so it's a must-have here. I'm wearing Slime Cross shoulders here for extra crit chance. That's another Wayrest Sewer set, but you can get the shoulders without ever setting foot in the dungeon. They come from one of the daily quest givers at the Undaunted Enclave. My second heavy attack set I'm wearing is Storm Master, and that comes from Tempest Island. Now there's some other sets you can run as your second set, but I don't think they're any easier to get than this. Noble Duelist Silks is one, and that comes from Blessed Crucible if you'd rather run that. The proc condition is easy, but it has a drawback in that you have to stay within melee range for it to work. Next is the Oaken Soul Ring, which is a crucial piece of gear for 1-bar heavy attack builds. Among the long list of buffs you get from this is Empower, which increases the damage of heavy attacks by 70%. To get this, you have to level the Antiquity skill line, which honestly isn't hard, and the little mini-game it presents can be entertaining in and of itself. So if you haven't already done that, get going on it. My other 2 rings here are Sergeant's Mail and the Bloodthirsty trait with weapon damage enchantments. If you have to, just use the rings as dropped and buy 2 weapon damage glyphs or have somebody make you a couple. That's all I've got on gear, but I have to add, you can't really substitute different gear on this build because it's gear driven, unlike other builds. So go farm that stuff. Oh, before I move on, one body piece here is heavy and the rest are medium. Traits should be divines, but you already saw I have at least one oddball piece on. The blue champion points are Fighting Finesse, Weapons Expert, Deadly Aim, and Wrathful Strikes. I want to point out one thing in the red tree, and that's Strategic Reserve. That's where all the health recovery comes from. This works on a Warden because you have an option to not use your ultimate since the bear will still be up and running anyway. And that pretty much wraps it up. I hope you enjoyed the Heavy Attack Warden. If you want more content like this, please like the video and subscribe. On one of the videos, a viewer commented that I should include a little section on the armor styles and colors, and I thought it was a good idea, so that'll be tacked on to the end of the video. Alright, thanks for watching. I'm Centurion, and you've been watching ESO Vault. Have a great day and enjoy your adventures in Tamriel.